She was certain she could calculate everything, from visit schedules to phone passwords. She set the rules, planted the flags, drafted a list of demands like a contract for submission. He didn't protest, didn't yell, didn't argue. He simply looked her in the eyes and said he'd think about it. And then, he started to act. Quietly, precisely, methodically. While she prepared for the next round of control, he was gathering evidence, restoring connections, sharpening his strategy. Every one of her moves was a test of his boundaries. Every one of his responses was a lesson. Love and power cannot coexist. When the folder with gold embossing landed on the table, she still didn't realize. It wasn't a polite refusal. It was a verdict. Hello, my friend. I'm so glad you stopped by my channel. If you're here for the first time, don't forget to subscribe and share this video with your friends or family. It really helps my channel a lot. Please tell me in which city or country you watch this video. I value every one of your comments. So, let's get started. The moment she dropped that folder onto the dining table, I knew something in our marriage had shifted irreversibly. 24 conditions, she announced, her smile strained and shallow. Not proposals, not a conversation starter, a mandate. She said she'd been reflecting on what she needed to feel better about her place in this relationship. Not about us. Just her. 3 years in, and the woman I'd once cherished had gradually morphed into someone I barely recognized. It hadn't happened overnight. It was a slow erosion. A passing remark here, a pointed jab there. First, it was my clothes. Then the people I spent time with. Before long, she was dissecting every hour of my day. As I skimmed through her meticulously outlined demands, it became glaringly obvious this wasn't a spontaneous decision. It was a calculated blueprint, the culmination of a long-building power grab. The list itself veered from the odd to the downright oppressive. I was to report my whereabouts at regular intervals. Any plans with friends had to be cleared 3 days ahead. Female friends, subject to her personal screening. My income, to be funneled into an account she would manage. Even gym hours were to be scheduled to her liking. No need to give an answer right away, she said, mistaking my silence for contemplation instead of what it really was. Quiet strategy. But I expect your agreement before the end of the week. I didn't flinch. That was what she wanted. A flare-up, something dramatic. Instead, I calmly folded the paper and met her gaze. I'll give it the attention it deserves, I replied, not blinking until she did. That brief flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. My first small win. Later that night, while she slept, I snapped photos of the absurd document and began crafting my response. This wasn't negotiation. This was an assault on my autonomy, and I had no intention of surrendering. I started with subtle defiance. The next morning, I left for work without sending the usual check-in. When she called, pressing for an explanation, I answered flatly, I was driving, then hung up. That night, I walked through the door an hour late, offering no excuse. You forgot our new rules? She asked, standing in the kitchen with arms folded. I didn't agree to anything, I said, pouring a drink. And I'm not going to. Her face flushed with anger. So you're just ignoring everything I said I need? No, I said, voice calm. I'm rejecting your attempt to control me. That's not the same thing. Over the next 2 weeks, I made a point of disregarding every item on her list. I went out when I wanted, with whom I pleased. I handled my finances on my own. I reconnected with friends she'd pushed away, including women she had tried to erase from my world. With every boundary I reclaimed, her reactions intensified. Tears, icy silences, slamming doors loud enough to shake the walls. I remained composed. When she threatened to leave, I simply said, "That's your call." She had counted on submission, or at least a conflict she could steer. What she hadn't anticipated was my steadfast resistance. One night, after another bitter confrontation where she accused me of destroying the relationship, I put it in clear terms. This isn't a monarchy, I said. I'm not here to be ruled. We either meet as equals, or we don't meet at all. She stormed out and stayed at her sister's for 3 days. When she came back, the air had changed. She seemed to realize her grab for power had only fractured things further. But rather than reconsider, she doubled down, this time with subtler plays. What she didn't realize was that her list had only solidified my determination. If she was looking for a war over control, then I was ready, but we'd be fighting on my battlefield. The more I resisted, the more her desperation began to seep through. She'd wait up, arms crossed, eyes blazing. Her tactics cycled predictably: blow-ups, tears, forced affection that felt less like love and more like manipulation. Then one morning, my credit cards vanished. When I confronted her, she explained she had secured them until we could sync up on financial priorities, item 7 on her precious list. I said nothing. Instead, I contacted my bank, reported them stolen, and had new cards sent to my office. The look on her face when I pulled one out at dinner that weekend, worth every expedited shipping fee. "This is just to spite me, isn't it?" she hissed. "No," I said, signing the check. "This is me living like an adult who doesn't need a permission slip to use his own money." Her efforts to assert control only ramped up. She began showing up at my office under the guise of surprise lunches, really just surprise inspections. She snuck tracking apps onto my phone while I slept. I deleted them within hours. She even reached out to the partners of my friends, trying to orchestrate joint social plans, a sneaky way to keep tabs on me through others. Each time, I responded with quiet precision. When the apps reappeared, I bought a second phone and left the first at home. When she ambushed me with a last-minute therapy appointment, I skipped it and went to a baseball game instead. I began gathering proof with deliberate precision, documenting every coercive episode, saving our text conversations, and subtly recording the most explosive arguments. The power dynamic had shifted. I was no longer reacting. I was directing the pace. For the first time in what felt like ages, I caught a glimpse of genuine unease on her face, a flicker of realization that her grip was slipping. At dinner one night, she tried a gentler approach. She reached across the table and clasped my hand softly. "I feel like we're drifting apart," she said, voice laced with feigned warmth. "Maybe I went too far with the list. We could revise it, together." I withdrew my hand. "There won't be any list," I said evenly. "Not 24 points, not a dozen, not even one. That's not who I am, and it's not what I agreed to when I said I do." Her eyes narrowed. "Then what do you want?" she asked, her mask of vulnerability starting to crack. "Respect," I said, "and the understanding that my autonomy isn't yours to police." Her calm shattered. "You've changed," she spat. "You never used to challenge me." "I've woken up," I answered, "and I'm not going back to silence." That night, I overheard her on the phone with her sister, her voice trembling with fury as she ranted about my unexpected defiance. What she framed as rebellion, I saw for what it truly was, the reawakening of my self-worth. And it was becoming increasingly clear. We couldn't both exist in this relationship as we were. Her need for control clashed fatally with my need to reclaim my identity. The breaking point arrived when I found out she had broken into my email. She had combed through benign exchanges with a college friend about a reunion, then, posing as me, replied to decline the invitation and told him not to contact me again. I didn't confront her. Instead, I took action. I called a lawyer. Quiet resistance had done all it could. If she wanted to play hardball, so could I. The legal consultation was a turning point. As I recounted the signs, from the infamous list of demands to the impersonation in my inbox, the attorney barely blinked. "Unfortunately, this is familiar," he said, sliding a file across the desk. "What's uncommon is your documentation. That gives you power." I left his office with a solid plan and a sense of relief I hadn't felt in years. The decision was made. I wasn't going to keep fighting little battles. I was setting up for the endgame. At home, I maintained the illusion of strained but functional normalcy while moving forward with quiet determination. I protected important paperwork, gradually moved essentials into a storage unit, and diverted a portion of my income into a separate account, precautions born not of spite, but survival. Her next move proved they were warranted. Over breakfast one morning, she casually said, "I've been thinking, maybe it's time we started a family." Her voice was overly light. "I stopped taking my birth control 3 weeks ago." I nearly choked on my coffee. This wasn't just manipulation, it was a lifetime trap, cloaked as reconciliation. "That's a choice we make together," I said, steadying my voice. "And we're nowhere near ready for that." She leaned forward, gauging my reaction. I thought it might fix what's broken. "A child isn't a cure," I said, rising from the table, "and I won't be cornered into parenthood." That night, I moved into the guest bedroom and booked an appointment for a vasectomy. Her escalation only quickened my pace. At the same time, I began reconnecting with the friends she had quietly cut from my life. While she was away visiting family one weekend, I met up with my old college circle, 5 friends I hadn't seen in far too long. Rebecca was among them. Her only offense had been maintaining a strong friendship with me before my wife entered the picture. "She called me," Rebecca said over drinks, "a couple months after the wedding, told me it wasn't appropriate to message you, even for your birthday. Suggested I back off." The others shared similar stories, messages they assumed I'd ignored, invites I'd apparently declined, social media blocks they didn't understand. She had surrounded me with silence, and I hadn't even noticed. "We just thought you'd moved on," one friend said, "until Trevor ran into you and said you seemed different, like you'd just woken up." Trevor raised his glass. "To clarity," he toasted. That night rekindled something in me. As we swapped stories and laughed, I started to recognize myself again, not the muted version she had molded. When Rebecca suggested we snap a group photo, everything clicked. "I need a favor," I told them. Something a little out there, but it might bring this all to an end. By the time I returned home the next day, we had a strategy. They would join me for dinner that Friday, just as she returned from a work trip. Rebecca, now a seasoned videographer, would covertly film the evening. It would be the final piece I needed. That night, my wife called to check in, her words wrapped in suspicion. I kept my answers honest, but vague. I didn't owe her detailed explanations anymore. Her irritation was palpable. "You've been distant," she said. "No," I replied. "I've been independent. There's a difference." After we hung up, I sent a message to the group chat we'd created. "Friday is locked in," I wrote. "Operation Non-Negotiable is a go." For the first time in what seemed like forever, a genuine smile broke across my face. Without realizing it, she'd handed me the perfect title for the document I was preparing with my lawyer: Acceptance of Non-Negotiable Terms. Inside that cleverly labeled file, divorce papers, just waiting for her to sign. The clock had officially started ticking. The thought of Friday lit a fire in me. Each day I honed the strategy like a craftsman sharpening a blade, refining every part of the plan. When the final documents showed up, they were enclosed in an elegant cream envelope, the title pressed in subtle gold lettering: Acceptance of Non-Negotiable Terms. The irony? It would go completely over her head, at least at first. I brought my friends into the loop, stressing how crucial it was that Rebecca be there. My wife's irrational hatred for Rebecca made her the ideal centerpiece for the setup. Years ago, I'd casually mentioned an art show Rebecca was hosting, and though she'd never met the woman, my wife exploded with baseless accusations and suspicion. That was one of the first clear warning signs I should have paid attention to. I wouldn't make that mistake again. By Thursday, I was prepping the house like it was an opening night. Every surface was scrubbed, the couch cushions fluffed to perfection, and the fridge stocked with everyone's favorites. In the office, I quietly installed a discreet camera, small and soundless, to capture her reaction to the documents. A precaution, in case she later claimed she'd been coerced or taken by surprise. That evening, she called with her usual syrupy tone. "I'm finishing up early today," she said cheerfully. "I should be back by 6 instead of 8. Perfect. I texted the group to show up by 5:30. "That actually works well," I said with casual ease. "I'll be here." "Anything planned for dinner?" she asked, her voice edged with her usual need for control. "There is actually," I replied, sticking to the facts. "But it's a surprise." She paused. "You know I hate surprises." "This one's worth it," I said. "See you tomorrow." Friday arrived wrapped in a strange sense of quiet. I worked from home, made sure the envelope sat clearly on the dining table, and ran a final check-in with the group. Rebecca would arrive first, bringing her camera equipment. The cover story? I was helping her with a photo series, just in case my wife showed up early. At 5:15, Rebecca's car pulled up the driveway. Watching her approach stirred something in me. Not romantic longing, but a bittersweet nostalgia for the friendship I'd let fall away because of relentless jealousy. "Still sure about this?" she asked, slinging her camera bags over her shoulder. "More than ever," I said, stepping aside to let her in. She got right to work, placing tiny cameras strategically around the room to capture every detail. "They're motion sensitive and back up to the cloud," she explained. "You'll have it all documented." By 5:40, everyone else had arrived. Trevor, Aaron, and the twins, Sabrina and Martin. We arranged ourselves casually in the living room with drinks and snacks, looking like just another relaxed gathering of friends. At 5:55, I glanced down at my phone. She just texted, 5 minutes out. Rebecca nodded subtly, confirming her main camera was already rolling. Conversation carried on at surface level, but I could see the slight change in everyone's demeanor, the tension of people waiting for something big to break. At exactly 6:02, her car pulled into the driveway. A moment later, the soft sound of keys jingled. The front door opened. Silence fell like a curtain. She froze in the entryway, clearly thrown by the unexpected crowd. 5 smiling faces turned toward her, and at the center of it all, Rebecca, the woman she'd demonized for years without ever exchanging a word. "Surprise," I said calmly, raising my glass. "Welcome home." Her face contorted, confusion first, then disbelief, hardening quickly into barely restrained fury. She stood in place, suitcase still in hand, like she wasn't sure if she'd walked into the wrong house or a trap. "What is this?" she asked, her voice low and tight. "Just catching up with some old friends," I said. "You've mentioned before that we don't entertain enough. Thought I'd take some initiative." Her eyes locked on Rebecca and filled with immediate venom. "You invited her into our home." "I invited all of them," I clarified. "Rebecca helped me organize everything." The curtain had lifted. Act 1 had begun. Even as her expression twisted with rage she was barely keeping under control, I felt a strange tranquility settle over me. Whatever affection I'd once had for her had been buried under years of domination and emotional manipulation. Tonight marked the close of something that should have ended long ago. I nodded toward the dining room. "Why don't you set your bag down? There's something on the table you'll want to look at." Our eyes met and held. "I finally got around to answering your non-negotiable terms." Her gaze jumped from the envelope on the table to Rebecca, calculating which threat to confront first. The room went still. My friends sat like statues, their faces carefully neutral, like spectators at a building rigged for demolition, waiting for the detonation. "Everyone out!" she barked, dropping her suitcase with a jarring thump that echoed through the hallway. "They're my guests now," I replied evenly. "They're staying." Color rushed to her face. "You planned this, didn't you? You knew I'd be coming home drained from a work trip and still, you brought her here?" "As deliberate as your exhaustive list of 24 conditions," I said, my voice steady. Her eyes narrowed. "Fine. Then here's my response." She stormed toward Rebecca, finger pointed like a blade. "You. Don't think I don't see what this is. Rebecca didn't budge. Her expression remained unreadable. The camera in her hand continued recording, completely steady. We've actually never met, Rebecca said calmly. Though you did call me once, just to tell me I wasn't allowed to say happy birthday to my friend. He's not your friend, my wife snapped. He's my husband. I'm not a thing to be owned, I interjected, stepping between them. That's always been the disconnect, I added. For the briefest instant, a flicker of uncertainty passed over her face, an acknowledgement that maybe she'd miscalculated. But just as quickly, her expression hardened again. So what is this? She demanded. A setup? You brought them here to turn against me? No ambush, I replied softly. They're here to witness something that matters. Check the envelope on the table, marked Acceptance of Non-Negotiable Terms. Suspicion narrowed her gaze, but curiosity got the better of her. She tore open the envelope with jerky motions and scanned the contents. First came confusion, then disbelief. Divorce papers? She whispered. Then louder. Divorce papers? 1 term, not 24, I told her. I want my life back. Her hands trembled as she flipped through the pages, her breath growing uneven. You can't be serious. You're ending this because I asked for reasonable boundaries? Boundaries aren't the same as control, I corrected. What you gave me wasn't a request. It was a set of demands. And this is your reply? In kind, I nodded. With an audience? She screamed, hurling the papers at me. With cameras? Is this supposed to humiliate me? It's called documentation, I said, nodding toward Rebecca's lens. After you faked my emails, froze my cards, and tracked where I went, I needed evidence. Witnesses. Your control wasn't just harmful, it was becoming dangerous. Her rage vanished as quickly as it had arrived. Tears gathered at the edges of her eyes, and her voice turned small, almost broken. I don't understand, she murmured. I thought we were getting better. I just wanted to be close to you. I had seen this shift before, the pivot to vulnerability. It used to work, but not anymore. Closeness isn't the same as suffocation, I said gently. It doesn't mean cutting me off from my friends, monitoring me, or making decisions for me. I can change, she whispered, reaching for my hand. I stepped away. You've had countless chances, and every time I pushed back, you just shifted your strategy, like trying to get pregnant without telling me. Her eyes went wide, stunned. That's not... We both know what it was, I cut in. Manipulation. She glanced around for the first time, suddenly aware that every detail of her performance had been witnessed. Her act dropped. She grabbed the discarded pages from the floor and ripped them in two. I'm not signing anything, she snarled. You want out? Then prepare for war. I smiled, not out of malice, but because the path was finally clear. Those were copies, I said. The originals were filed yesterday. I'm not asking for more than what's mine. I just want a clean break. You think this is a win? She spat. Her hands shook with rage. You think you've outplayed me, bringing in your little film crew and friends. This isn't a game, I said. It's a decision to walk away from something that's been eating both of us alive. She glanced around the room, seeing in the quiet stares the reflection of every mood swing, every threat, every tear she'd weaponized. And in that silence, realization dawned. The power she clung to was gone. This isn't over, she hissed, grabbing her suitcase. It is, I said quietly. She slammed the door behind her so hard the walls shook and picture frames rattled. For a moment, the house was wrapped in silence, like the sky just after a lightning strike. Then Trevor gave a low whistle. That was... He paused, looking for the right word. Necessary, I finished. The moment had taken far too long to arrive, but at last, it was here. My friends exchanged quiet glances, relief tinged with unease evident in their expressions. Rebecca gave the recording equipment one final check. All good, she confirmed. Video and audio are sharp. If she tries to spin the story, you've got the truth on record. I responded with a subtle nod, a strange serenity settling over me. I had spent months collecting documentation, organizing everything meticulously for this encounter. But when it finally came, it didn't feel like triumph. It felt like exhalation. Think she'll come back tonight? Sabrina asked, her eyes drifting toward the front door. She won't, I said, certain. Her ego won't let her. She'll retreat to her sister's place, lick her wounds, and plot her next move. She can't do anything now, Aaron added. You've already filed. It's not her game anymore. I nodded once more. My finances were protected, the paper trail was solid, and my lawyer was in full control regarding the house. She had no levers left to pull. We moved into the kitchen, and as the evening wore on, the tension in the room gradually dissolved. Soon, the space filled with laughter and conversation. Friends I hadn't seen in years found their place again in my life like they'd never left. That's when it hit me, how much I'd surrendered for someone who saw my support system not as comfort, but as competition. That night, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Angry messages came first, followed by tearful voicemails, then thinly veiled threats, something about her brother, the paralegal, and how I'd regret this. I silenced the notifications. I had no intention of responding. There was nothing left to discuss. When the house fell quiet after midnight, I sat alone, scrolling through the wave of her messages. The pattern was predictable. First rage, then negotiation, followed by guilt, pressure, and finally a desperate plea. Her last message read, "Please call me. Let's fix this. I'll get rid of the list. We can start again." But the time for second chances had passed. That list hadn't caused the rupture. It had only revealed what had been broken for a long time. My response was brief and final. The divorce is filed. Direct any further contact through my attorney. Then, I blocked her number. The next 3 months were as chaotic as I'd expected. She dodged the process server, forcing my attorney to get inventive. She tried to drain funds from our joint account, but I had already safeguarded my portion. One day she showed up at my workplace, causing a scene, ironically strengthening my case, since it was all caught on security cameras. Not long after, her sister reached out. She began with blame, but gradually her voice softened. "She's always needed to control everything," she admitted. "It's been that way since we were kids. I love her, but I understand why you left." 94 days after that critical evening, the divorce was finalized. She didn't bother to attend the final hearing. Her attorney, a weary man who looked like he'd seen her type too many times, wrapped everything up without delay or resistance. No arguments, no theatrics. Maybe, at last, she realized it was over. Outside the courthouse, Rebecca called. She and the others were truly back in my life now, this time for good. "How are you feeling?" she asked. "Like I finally let go of a burden I never should have carried," I answered honestly. "Any regrets about how you handled things?" I thought for a second. "None," I said. "Not everything needs a graceful ending. Sometimes you just need a clean break." She had masked manipulation as boundaries. I answered with something far more powerful: clarity. Half a year later, I moved to a new neighborhood, not to run, but to step forward. Through mutual friends, I learned she was seeing someone new, a quiet man, the type unlikely to challenge her control. I wished him luck. Or better, the wisdom to recognize the warning signs early. As for me, I rebuilt my life around what I had once lost sight of: truth, respect, and boundaries that actually meant something. When I eventually started dating again, the woman I met said, "Most men dodge honest conversations. You're different, refreshingly direct." "Life's too short for mind games," I told her. And that was the most important lesson I carried with me. Ultimatums only hold power when both parties fear walking away. But if you're not afraid to leave, you take your power back. Because when someone hands you a list of conditions, they don't want partnership, they want control. And I'd rather be alone than lose myself again. Her infamous list of 24 demands was never a path to mutual growth. It was a trap. But in the end, it served its purpose. It showed me the way out. This story has come to an end. What's your opinion? Share it in the comments, my friend. And if you like this story, check out other exciting videos on my channel. I'll say goodbye until the next video. See you.